So this is the third workshop in our series, which is called Preserve Your Story. And we really like to thank the City of Yarra for supporting this program. And we've got 4 workshops in total. So the idea was that we could have some practical workshops for people to learn how to get their things organised at home, their own collections or their artworks or their family memorabilia or other objects that they've got around the place. And also, once people have some skills at home, that also helps us as well for artists who are lodging their material in our archive. We have an archive of about 5,000 files of subject files and artist files. We have a library, we have posters, we've got about 12,000 slides and many more digital images. I'm not even sure how many digital images we have. And we're also a live community, so we've got about 250 members at the moment, and they're either artists or they're academics, curators, students, or people who are just interested in supporting the Women's Art Register. So we hold events like this to assist people with training and just to build our community and just to keep everyone connected and supporting women's art practice. So we've got Care of Studios today, which is Robyn on the left with the dark hair and Elle with the blue shirt. Welcome. And they're both trained conservators, and we've worked with them before, and Robyn was actually a volunteer with the Women's Art Register a couple of years ago as well. So they're incredibly talented and really great at presenting workshops. So we'll hand over to them in a minute. But just with some housekeeping, if everyone can stay on mute, that'd be great. And as I said, we'll do questions at the end, all in a block of about 20 minutes. There's plenty of time for questions. And if you just write them in the chat as we go along, and then Christina will run that session after the presentation. And depending how we go, if there's not many questions, you can take your microphone off and we can have a chat with you as well. But if there's a lot of questions, Christina will just manage those just so we can get through them. All right, so I'll hand over to Robyn and Elle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Just welcome to today's workshop. And just to begin, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge that sovereignty that has never been ceded, it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So good afternoon and welcome to the third session of the Preserve Your Story workshops with the Women's Art Register. So my name's Robyn Ho and I'm an art conservator and a past volunteer at law, which Caroline just mentioned.
So my name is Eleanor Vallier and I'm also a conservator and past volunteer, and together, as Caroline mentioned, we run a conservation studio in Collingwood called Co-Studios. So for today's webinar, we will discuss simple ways you can care for any textiles that you may have at home, be they historic or artworks or costumes. So just a bit on the structure of the webinar. So the long-term preservation of textiles is complicated by the diversity of the materials that may make up textiles. So they can be made from one or a combination of different natural and manufactured materials and fibres, and adding to this dyes, finishes and decorations, such as buttons, metal threads and zippers, that can all be used in the one textile. So you can begin to see the range and complexity of the fields just by the materials that are within them. Textile objects also have varying construction and functions, which ranges from 2-dimensional flags to 3-dimensional costumes and oversized carpets, quilts and tapestries. This workshop aims to provide a brief overview, as each object can have very complex needs, and the field of textiles conservation is a vast one and not our specific area of speciality. So this should be a brief introduction to some of the concepts that are contained within it. So in this workshop, we'll try to give you an overview of what textiles are commonly made of, what are some common types of degradation that you might see, how the best ways to store these objects, what are the simple preservation approaches that you can do at home, and go over some useful resources for any more information on specific topics. And then we'll have a short demonstration about some things that you can do at home, and then go into our Q&A session. So as Caroline said, if any of the content brings up questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the session. Yeah, we won't be going over some things that we've covered in previous workshops about basic preservation approaches. So if you have any questions at the end, feel free to email us and we can help you out a bit with that one. So just onto our first slide. There we go. So starting with fibers. This is obviously the base of all textiles. And the main fibers that make up most textiles are classified as either natural fibers, so derived from a plant or an animal, or manufactured fibers, which are modified organic or synthetic polymers. So the type of fiber influences how the textile object may degrade. Therefore, it's good to know what sort of fibers you have in your collection. So natural fibers originate from plants or animals, and they may be classified as stem, leaf, or seed fibers, depending on which part of the plant provides the fiber. So common examples are cotton, linen, flax, or hemp. Animal or protein fibers are obtained from the coats of animals, such as sheep, or the exudates of certain insects, such as the silk moth larva. They're the most common of those ones. Manufactured fibers are made by extruding a liquid polymer through the small heads in a spinneret, which is a device much like a shower head. So they sort of extrude out as single fibers. And as that polymer emerges as long filaments, they can be twisted like a natural fiber is to form a yarn, or they can be cut into short lengths for spinning into staple yarn. Modified natural polymer fibers are made from materials that do exist in nature, such as the cellulose from plants. An example of this is rayon. Synthetic fibers are created directly from chemicals rather than from naturally existing polymers. And they've been in use since their creation in the 19th and 20th centuries. So an example of a synthetic fiber is nylon, polyester, and acrylic. Okay. Into the fabric structure.
So the way that a fabric is constructed also influences the way in which it is preserved and its durability over time. So the main ways that textiles are constructed are woven, non-woven, knitted, and other techniques. So first off with woven textiles. So woven is produced by interlacing two sets of yarn. So one set of yarn, the warp, is put under tension and kept parallel, and the weft is woven up and over under the warp. So there are three basic weave patterns. There's plain weave, twill weave, and satin weave. And certain aspects of the fabric structure have implications for preservation. So yarns can be pulled out of alignment, and this can change the luster and even the color of the fabric, and sometimes quite irreversibly. So things like satin pattern has a particular look, and twill pattern gives a certain sheen to the fabric. So some fabrics are prone to shrinking due to the type of fiber, yarn, or weave. So loose weaves can shrink during washing and drying, and shrinking can often be irreversible. Knitted textiles, on the other hand, are made by interlooping yarns made by hand or machine. So the structure of these loops kind of make knits quite wrinkle resistant, form fitting, and really stretchy. However, they're really easily deformed and can stretch out of shape if they're hung vertically. So, and often this kind of deformation is quite irreversible. Then the other third type is the non-woven textiles. So non-woven textiles are made directly from fibres by interlocking the fibres either mechanically, thermically, with adhesives, or with a combination of these techniques. So while non-woven textiles do not fray if they're cut, they're inelastic and do not regain their shape if stretched. So felt is a really prime example of a non-woven textile. Historically, felts were made of wool. However, modern day felts can be made of blends with natural and synthetic fibres. And then the other techniques kind of include things like crocheting, lace making, netting, and braiding. So netting is commonly found in veils and lace, and are usually delicate fabrics with many open areas that can really snag and tear easily.
So onto dyes. Since antiquity, textiles have been coloured by means of dyes. Until the late 19th century, with the introduction of synthetic dyes, all dyes were naturally sourced from plants, shellfish, and insects. Dyes are usually applied by immersion in a dye bath, and in this bath a mordant may also be added to fix the dye to the fibre. Thickening agents can be added to dyes to form printmaking pastes for screen printing, and artists' paints such as oil and acrylic have also been used to embellish objects over time, such as flags and banners especially. Textiles may also be decorated using stitching techniques such as embroidery and applique. Surface ornamentation may include a host of other materials such as beads, sequins, metal threads, feathers, and paper. A great number of processes have been applied to fibres, yarns, or fabrics from the 20th century onward to alter their properties. These processes can be chemical, for example, the weighting of silk, or mechanical, such as moire or watered silk or napped woolens, and can either be permanent or impermanent. Some of these processes are applied for aesthetic reasons, to alter texture, luster, or drape, and others are for more functional reasons, so to improve the ease of care, comfort, and durability, or to provide protection, such as a fire retardant. A variety of materials, including starches, waxes, glues, and clays, have also been applied to textiles as finishes. So the intrinsic vulnerabilities that these processing techniques can often create in the object. So intrinsic vulnerabilities are degradation factors that arise from these original manufacturing techniques, materials, and also just the use and wear of the object. So the following processes are common ways in which textiles have intrinsic vulnerabilities from these processes. So weighted silk. Some manufacturing and finishing processes actually have disastrous consequences for the long-term preservation of the textiles. So a classic example is the weighting of silk with metallic salts that contain metals such as iron and tin. These were used widely in the 19th and 20th centuries. And these agents are added to silk to improve the drape and restore the weight that it naturally loses as a result of the processing of silk for dyeing. So any sort of coloured silk that has a nice drape or weight to it has probably been weighted. Unfortunately, however, the metallic salts that are used to weight them lead to acidic deterioration and greatly increase silk's sensitivity to light damage. So as a result, many weighted silks and the costumes made from them are extremely weak, brittle, and fracturing. This is a condition known as shattered silk, which you can see in this picture here, and a few of you might have come across it as well. Another example of a harmful manufacturing process is the use of iron salts in dyeing. So dark, brittle textile fibres have sometimes been dyed using an iron mordant. So much like the weighting of silk, any time iron comes into contact with the textile, it will cause acid deterioration over time, and it catalyzes the photooxidization of the organic materials in textiles. much like silk. So that results in a significant loss of strength over time. So other metal mordants, for example, aluminium, have also been used in a more limited extent, but they can have similar damaging effects. The last deterioration process that we'll go over is bleaching. So most bleaches are harmful to textiles. Despite this, they have been used to whiten fabrics either during manufacture or use. And for example, silk was sometimes bleached with sulfur to remove any of the original yellowness of that fiber. And so while it might result in a very nice, crisp white, it does, every time it's used, degrade the natural fiber structure of those textiles over time.
So I guess inherent vulnerabilities of textiles. So there are kind of general characteristics of textiles that make them just naturally vulnerable to degradation. So one of them is their organic nature, predominantly organic. So organic materials are prone to natural processes of deterioration, as well as through use and wear. But textiles also have, as mentioned with the embellishments in the previous slide, textiles can also be made with some inorganic materials as well, or incorporate components such as glass, asbestos, and metal. So it's a bit of a mixed bag of materials. It's fibrous structure. So fibers are long, fine rod-like structures capable of being twisted together to form a yarn. So that's the basis of what a textile is. So in a textile, that large surface area of fibers is exposed. So it makes it really susceptible to harmful substances in the environment. So there's more surface area that's open to the environment and therefore more sites for degradation. It's flexibility. So textiles are very flexible and generally do not retain their shape without an aid of some sort of support. So they are prone to distortion and creasing, which can form splits in the fabric over time. Textiles, especially costumes, may be stored flat, but they're usually displayed three-dimensionally, and as a result have different and very case-by-case needs in terms of volume, dimension, and support, and it depends on the design of the costume and so many factors. Absorbency is a big issue, so textiles are just inherently absorbent and porous, and so they readily become stained and absorb moistures in the environment and spills and things like that. And handling. So everyday textiles are often treated with a degree of familiarity, not usually applied to works of art. So precious or historic textiles really shouldn't be handled or cleaned in the same way as everyday clothing without the risk of damaging them.
Okay, so due to the inherent material qualities, textiles are commonly vulnerable to a range of physical and chemical damage. So physical damage can include insect attack, shrinkage, tears, splits where textiles have been folded or creased and stored over time, inappropriate repairs, worn areas, and damage from a lack of proper support during storage or display. And common chemical deterioration processes include fading and discoloration due to exposure to UV and high lighting levels, the weakening of fibers initiated by exposure to light and UV, mold growth, damage from pollutants in the storage and display environments, and also damage caused by perspiration, blood, and other stains from use. So all the most common types of damage to textiles are generally caused by poor handling, poor storage methods, inappropriate display methods, chemical changes in the textiles themselves, chemical changes caused by contact with other materials or the environment, and various combinations of any and all of these.
So the best way to care for any material really is keeping them in appropriate storage conditions. So the ideal environmental conditions for textiles are listed in this slide here, but they're obviously very difficult to maintain in your home. So the key is really just maintain a cool, dark, dry and stable place for your storage or your textile objects, and try to avoid drastic changes in temperature and humidity. So it's also might be best to store or set aside, one dark drawer or chest of drawers just for the storage of your textiles. Excessive light and UV exposure can cause fading of colorants and dyes and weakening of fibres. At high humidity, fibres swell, so they absorb water, and at a low humidity, they shrink as they release that water. So that creates deformations and wrinkles and creases and things like that. And high relative humidities also accelerates corrosion, things of like brass buttons, zippers, things like that.
Okay, so you can protect your textiles from pollutants, dust, and insects by storing them in appropriate enclosures such as acid-free boxes, padded hangers, and wrappers. Depending on what the textile object is, if it is a flat or a three-dimensional object, or how much storage space you have, that will determine how you might choose to store and display your objects. So here are some key tips to storing your textiles. Pre-wash all fabrics for packing, cushioning, or mounting textiles if they are also a fabric before you use them. So for example, any dust covers or linings. Store small flat textiles with as few folds as possible in boxes or drawers. And if you do need to fold an object, to prevent any sort of tight folds where it's, the fabric is very much folded on itself. You can pad them out with crumpled acid-free tissue or lightweight cotton sheeting or a soft nylon tulle or a cotton knit tubing, which is stuffed with polyester. You can see in the picture here, this second picture, and the reason that you pad that out is so that over time, the fabric fibers aren't in a very sharp crease. So any folds won't result in splits over time. So if you are able to store them in boxes, you want to line those boxes with padding and with objects interleaved with acid-free tissue or other sheeting if they must be stacked. If possible, it's best to limit the stacking of textiles as that weight can also put pressure on the fibers. And store larger textiles such as quilts and rugs rolled on a padded tube. Hang costumes on padded hangers and store them flat if they're very fragile or heavy or beaded. And use stable acid-free materials for your supports and boxes. And you can protect textiles from dust with acid-free tissue or cotton sheeting covered with a plastic sheeting such as a mylar or Tyvek. And the plastic sheeting will also protect it from any water leaks if that's an issue. If you are thinking of displaying your textiles, there are some general approaches you can take as well. So flat textiles can be framed and displayed on padded mounts to keep the shape. Oversized flat textiles can be supported by a custom hanging system such as Velcro on the back or a sealed dowel and casing which is attached to the back top of the textile. Garments on display should really have a custom mannequin which is padded to support the shape of that textile. Display textiles for just limited time periods, for example, a 3-month maximum. So rotating display textiles, as obviously light and UV are, kind of cause deterioration quite rapidly, and keep some representative objects out of a rotation so that they remain pristine indefinitely for future research or to make reproductions. And where possible, use display cases as they protect against dust and pollutant exposure.
And it's a few points about handling. So inappropriate handling can also accelerate the degradation of textiles. So here are some tips. So one, just try to avoid wearing historical garments. So the wearing kind of can damage the fabric and can result in tearing or staining. Identify fragile textiles that require special hanging. handling, and supports. Use pencils for documentation, don't use ink. So for labeling your boxes or things like that, or tags. Wash hands before working with textiles, or wear clean gloves to avoid any kind of soiling. Handle textiles only when necessary, making gentle planned movements, thus minimizing the risk of physical damage to objects, because they can be weaker than they appear to be. For smaller textiles, provide a flat support or custom padded box. They're large enough to adequately support the entire textile before moving it. Handle the flat support, hanger or mount rather than the textile itself. So you'll see that in the pictures in this slide, the person handling them is holding the support or the enclosure or box, or rather than the actual textile. Pack textiles with adequate cushioning to prevent abrasion and vibration when you move it. Provide custom supports for handling oversized textiles. So rolls or tubes also make a useful tool for turning over large textiles. So I guess the thing is to plan for things that are difficult or awkward to move, to actually figure out ways or supports that can help you move that object without handling the object itself. And oversized textiles sometimes require 2 or more people. So it's as simple as just getting someone, never move something by yourself, and plan it really well before you move things.
Okay, so the complexity and variety of materials that we've gone over that comprise textile objects means that conservation techniques really need to be applied on a case-by-case basis. However, there are some simple approaches that will help you maintain your objects at home for years to come. So as we've mentioned, store in archival quality enclosures and keep them in a stable, dark, cool and dry location. Interleave or pad vulnerable elements such as beading or decorations, even more so than the objects themselves. Making sure that the object is either on a padded hanger, a box or a roller, avoiding tight folding and stressing of the fabric. Regularly monitor the condition, so some general housekeeping. Particularly pay attention to materials that may be the most vulnerable, such as dyes and colorants, natural materials and metal components. Housekeeping and pest control, so keep storage areas dry and clean. Ensure woolens and other keratinous objects in the collection are regularly monitored for the presence of insect pests, so in particular clothes moths and carpet beetles. If you're bringing any new textiles into a collection, it's best to quarantine them in a freezer for a few weeks before you integrate them into your collection to ensure that the pests aren't inadvertently introduced. If in doubt, contact a conservator. So you can find textile-specific conservators in the AICCM directory. And if you do identify something that looks like it's actively degrading, quarantine it from the rest of your collection and contact a conservator for advice. So rather than keeping it with the others. And if you want to read any more about the topics we've gone over, here are some useful resources. We will provide this list as well as a copy of the presentation for all of you at the end. But yeah, there's some good videos as well as written text there with a few, different things you could do for specific pieces in your collection if you have any of those. And now we're going to do a little demo. So we'll just bear with us while we just switch over. And in our demo, we're going to show you how you can turn your vacuum cleaner into a tool for brush vacuuming with some tulle, and then how you might go about brush vacuuming a textile that you have in collection. So that's something you can do perhaps before you put it into an acid-free box, or just if you notice something is a bit dusty, if it's been on display. This is a good way to sort of sweep up any any grime, dust, or pollutants that might be on the surface of the textile. So let's just switch over. Yes, you mute that one. Okay. So over here, we've got a few of the things that we'll use to turn our vacuum cleaner into textile appropriate cleaning mechanisms. So we've got our vacuum hose here. If possible, it's best to use a vacuum cleaner with the highest grade of HEPA filter, because these are, that's the best filter for sort of getting 99.95 or something close to that amount of dust and any other sort of non-natural material. Now, the thing with using a vacuum on a textile is obviously that's a very big hole for any sort of beading or loose fibers or decoration to be sucked up in. So that could be really disastrous for your textile. So what we can do is modify this vacuum cleaner so that it's safer to use when using it on any sort of precious items. There are attachments you can buy on eBay. Here's one here that has an attachment that goes on the end of the vacuum cleaner, then it's got some hosing, and this has got a little brush head. So that is a really good way to sort of slowly brush up any dust. But even that, I'd want to put some tulle across the top of that just to prevent any material that is attached to the piece being sucked up into the vacuum. So the easy way to turn this into something safe is to get some tulle, and here we're going to use 2 pieces doubled over just to be extra safe, that no fibers or beading or anything of that nature can come away. And then we'll just attach it with some rubber bands, and that should be fine. So when we do the actual vacuum demonstration, after the end of it, this can get really grimy and dirty, but if anything is loose, it will also stop it from being sucked up. Now, before we go into that, we also have this screen here, which we've made, which if you are wanting to clean anything that has heavy beading or decorative elements of that nature, this is just some fly wire screen that we've bought and then cut into the appropriate shape and just edged off with some tape so that it forms a nice discrete screen. So we'll bring our textile into frame, and you can see that. So this is a nice embroidered piece that is covered on one side, this side, with cat hair, which is maybe something you might have encountered if your cat likes to sit on all your beautiful blankets. So if this was a very beaded piece, we could put this screen over before we go in, maybe weight it down at the edges with a ruler or some weights of some variety, and then we could go in and do our brush vacuuming through the screen, so that just adds a layer of protection. This one doesn't actually have any beading, so we might do it without.
Cool. So I will show you some brush vacuuming techniques.
Yes.
So you've prepped your end of your, sorry, I'm just going to detangle. Prepped your end of your vacuum, and basically what brush vacuuming does is you're hovering the vacuum over your object, but you're not making any contact. There's a gap under here. And you're brushing all the dirt into to be received by the vacuum. So the vacuum is basically sucking up all the dirt, and the brush is pushing it into the flow of the vacuum. So before you turn on your vacuum, just make sure it's on its lowest setting. So with ours, we have a little suction plus minus. So I turn it on. So it might be a very loud noise. Then I turn it all the way down. So you want it the lowest setting possible. And this again is just a safety measure because you don't want to accidentally suck up a loose thread or beading or things like that. That might not be apparent when you look at it by eye, but when you use the vacuum, it might pull up a thread. And then basically you go along and just systematically brush. Oh, it's stuck on there. Luckily, this embroidery is very stable. But basically, you would weight your textile and brush the fur, if I can. It's very tenacious, into the floor of the vacuum.
And this is a hake brush. If your textile is a little more robust, you can maybe use something a little stronger. So this is more of a synthetic fiber brush, and that will actually pick up the fibers a bit more. The hake brush is what we suggest for using on all objects because it's really soft and gentle. But obviously every textile is different. So with this one, with the embroidery, it might be a little too soft to pick up some of those more ingrained fibers. So just as long as the brush that you're using isn't very strong or isn't too strong, a nice soft paintbrush can work as well, as long as it's clean and unused. But
so the key is to, I guess, start from the most simplest and gentle, and then get a sense of the vulnerability of your material, and then adjust accordingly. So I think you can tell here, even though it's at the lower setting, that was where my line was before. This section here, it won't show up on the camera, but basically it has been cleaned to the same degree as this side, and this is completely covered in cat hair still. So, and that was just at a very simple brush. So, and even with something like this, where it's very long hairs that kind of have been tangled, even just a brush without the vacuum might help as well.
yeah, and also the last point on that I'd say is that if you are interested in getting these attachments, you can get them on eBay. And this brush is that's got the brush at the end of the attachment. Now you can also, as I said, put the tulle over that, as it's got a little bit of plastic on the internal spot. So you just sort of press the tulle down and tape or rubber band it as well. And that can be, a bit more closer contact, but that brush stops you from getting the nozzle of the vacuum actually in contact with it. So, any of those textiles that want to be sucked up, that's a good way to stop that.
And sometimes these smaller attachments are very good to getting into tight spots. So you've got this kind of attachment, but you also have other smaller heads where you can get into tiny little crevices, or especially if it's got beading or there's a lot, it's very three-dimensional. Sometimes you need to actually vacuum underneath beads and things, or like at the edges.
But again, in any of this sort of work, really important to make sure that your textile is being weighted down and supported, and that you're going in really gently. So because obviously the textile will have a tendency to be sucked up into the vacuum, and that can be really disastrous for your textile if it's very vulnerable, like if it's a silk that might be on the brink of shattering or something. I would not even go in with a vacuum at all. But this can be a good way to safely get some of the dust and grime off textiles before you get into it for storage. So I think we'll switch back over to our other view, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So bear with us.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you. I'm just going to introduce Christina, who is our treasurer. And
Caroline,
Christina's
muted.
Oh, it says that it's off. Can you hear me now?
Caroline,
Yeah,
are you talking?
I'm talking.
Silverfish.
Can you hear me now?
Fishes.
My mute button's off. Anyway, I'll introduce Christina now, who's going to do the Q&A. Go ahead, Christina.
Oh, you can.
Oh,
I'm working out whether I'm mute or unmute.
You're good to go. And
I'm good to go.
yes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, there weren't a lot of questions, so obviously you've done a really great job of presenting. But one that I saw when somebody asked what type of brush, well, you answered that. But where would you get that specialist one from, the hake brush?
I think you can get it just from art shops. So it's actually a brush that's normally used to apply varnishes on paintings. So it's like a goat hair or a hair. Yeah.
Okay. And the other kind of question that was coming in, or two people asking what's the best kind of moth or silverfish protection?
Yeah, so there's the best one that conservators recommend and use are the pheromone traps for any sort of insect damages. So
like sticky kind of traps.
I think you can actually get some of them in pantry moth and closed mouth from the supermarket. But what they have is like a little sort of paper structure that forms a little base, and then it's sticky stuff on the bottom, and you will get a little pheromone tablet that you place on the sticky stuff. And essentially the idea is that the insects and moths are attracted to that pheromone scent going out, and then they get trapped in the sticky material. And so, I mean, it's not the nicest for them, but it is a good way to preserve it, and much better than mothballs, which actually have really harmful chemicals in them that can sort of off-gas and cause bad things to happen, as well as that awful smell that everybody's used to. And the other thing with pests is just, I suppose, to secure sort of your, know that where you're keeping your objects is maybe away from windows, or, there's sort of places that bugs can get in, so doors and windows, and, securing your sort of house about that.
But yeah, I think generally with pest control, just try and do non-chemical processes. So it's a lot of sticky traps and things like that, just because introducing chemicals and pesticides into your collection just creates more harmful chemicals and deterioration.
Right. Someone's asking whether you have an example of a textile object you've worked on in your studio, and what sort of challenges do you come across? You stated up front that you were not textile conservators.
No, we're not, but so in the slides, the first and the last slide, or the intro slides, are an object that we recently worked on. So it was a beaded vest from Borneo. It was 1900s, I think, and it was complicated because it was heavily beaded, really fragile. The beading was sewn in with a very natural, almost drying, decaying thread,
something quite rough
and
fibrous,
and it was blue, like a navy blue body with red trim, and the red trim was water soluble. So it was super dusty. It had been stained, so we couldn't apply a wet treatment because of the red trim was water soluble, and so we had to use sponges we had to get in and amongst all the beading, so it was quite complicated to actually just dry clean it. But and dry cleaning is just dry methods, not actual dry cleaning like we think dry cleaning is. But so yeah, we did a lot of vacuuming and sponging with and chemical sponges.
We used that sort of fly screen screen whenever
the
we
top.
were vacuuming it, because of the, intrinsic vulnerabilities of the fibers and the beads being so small and fragile and irreplaceable, essentially, because they were actually shells.
And kind
so
of handmade.
that screen, we weighted the edges of it with some glass plates so that we really weren't going to pull that up at all. And then the final thing that we did with it was, and the reason it came into our studio was for a display piece. So the client wanted it on a stand, and we used sort of a kimono stand inspired, which is a bit of a T shape in a base, and then they wanted to be able to see the front and back of it. So we were putting it in an acrylic box, but the really important thing with that was making sure that we had really adequate padding on the stand itself. So it was a T, and it was just, a square acrylic. So we had to pad out the edges of that.
Like a rod.
Yeah, of the rod that it would be resting on. And then we also made a double insert with a wadding to sort of line the vest to protect it. So much like for storing things in boxes, also on display, you want to make sure that the textile itself is never in contact with any sharp edges, like, sharp like that, or a coat hanger or anything, because over time that pressure will probably cause those fibers to want to start splitting because it's a sharp edge. So that was,
yeah. And I think we did that design of a stand because the vest was actually a very square vest with seams on the shoulder. It wasn't like a rounded, it was quite rectangular and flat, so we could do minimal padding. But if it was, say, something maybe more three-dimensional, more rounded, then it would require a different kind of solution. But that was designed based on that object and the way the seams and the construction of the actual garment. So
okay. I'm trying to sort of group things together here, but I've got a question about mould and what do you do about mould, and then it also probably on the same lines, what would you normally recommend in the case of something like mould or other degradation? Is it just a question of slowing it down, or how would you then conserve it? Cut it out, repair it? What?
Well, mould is, I guess, it's an organism and it requires water and a food source. So the way to get rid of mould is to remove those conditions in which it wants that it can survive in. So a good thing is to put things in very cold freezer situation, so it's so cold that it can't survive anymore.
Or also, if it's able to withstand it, UV from sunlight also can kill mold. So you could lay your object out in the sun for a few hours. Obviously, if you think it is something that might have a colorant or a dye that's going to be affected by that, it's maybe not the best thing.
Yeah.
But also, I think some sort of vinegar, there's sort of tales going around on washing with vinegar as a way to kill it as well, or ethanol, which is like, a pure alcohol.
But yeah, the first step is always to vacuum it up first. So get as much as you can off first, and you want to do it in a location where outside or away from the rest of your collection, so you're not spreading mold spores or anything around. And then as soon as you've kind of gotten rid of it, then is to then go through those processes. Say like put it in a freezer where you're getting the last bit.
And if you're going to vacuum it, so for example, this is some paintings, but working up in the East Kimberley in an art centre, and we came across a bunch of mould on some paintings, because obviously, if we're down south, the conditions are quite stable, but the further north you get in Australia, the more intense the humidity and longer wet periods, etc. So in that sort of situation, what we did was immediately isolate all of the items out of the rest of the collection so that there's no spreading. And then we laid them out in the sun for a few hours to kill the immediate spores, and then vacuumed it all up, and then went in with further treatments of an ethanol water mix to kill that material anymore.
Yeah, and that's a common kind of combination of adding ethanol with water, because ethanol is trying to evaporate, so it kind of removes the water out of the system as well. It kind of dries out your object, so you're trying to get rid of that water source in which that organism wants to feed off.
It is, if you did come across any mold though, I think it's probably advisable to at least consult a conservator, just because, they can maybe advise you to do a little solubility test. So, you don't want to be dousing your textile in a water ethanol mix if it's sensitive to water, and then your dyes are running all over the place. And, so it is very case by case and dependent on, what the vulnerabilities in your object are. But step number one, get it away from the rest of the collection.
Yeah.
I think that's probably answered the making sure there are no pests before you clean and store, because freezing is probably a good way to do it.
Yeah. So if you have a chest freezer, that's the best thing. And so, anything that you do find with pests in it, if bugs or insects or anything coming in that you're not sure about, put it in a plastic bag, seal it up with, tape. So it's a, discreet item and nothing can get in or out, and then put it in that chest freezer, or if it's, a normal freezer, if it's small enough, leave it in there for a number of weeks. I think 4 to 6 is just sort of your standard time period, just to sort of, it's like a nice slow sleep for all those insects. And then once it comes out, obviously once it's defrosted, give it another brush vacuum, just to sort of get up any more grime or pests or any carcasses or larvae that might be within it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the life cycle of whatever's in there.
Yeah. So again, if you can see the insect and you can maybe do a bit of sleuthing to identify what it is, you should be able to find some, material online about what that life cycle is and the best way to, a lot of information is out there on Google, which is really great. And, there's a lot of resources, but again, it's all about making sure you know what you're dealing with, what your textile is made of, so that, you can just be aware of all the potential areas that might have damage to them.
Yes. I think once the V&A got carpet beetle, and they put carpets in freezers for 18 months.
Yeah. So, I mean, when it's something
a long time.
Yeah, they'd have to have a lot of freezers.
I think so, yeah. Whereas we've just got to make do with our freezer. I don't think there's anything else that we haven't really covered. The slowing degradation down. Yeah. I don't think there's a lot more you can do. Once it's started, you can remove it, but then...
Yeah, you can't necessarily reverse it, but you can slow it down, and it depends on what type of degradation, obviously. But if it's an inherent degradation of the material, of the original material, and time passing, that's kind of hard to...
And unfortunately, if iron has been used as a mordant or to weight your silk, unfortunately you can't really get rid of those iron.
Yeah, the only thing is to maybe keep it in a state, like a good environment, that there's less kind of things in the environment that starts the chemical reaction. So what it is it kind of makes the mordant, kind of makes it susceptible to photo oxidation and catalytic effects of breaking bonds and blah blah blah.
So storing it out of the light, out of UV.
Moisture.
And so just all those principles that we always come back to, of a cool, dark, stable, dry place.
Because if it's away from those kind of environmental factors, then there's no or minimal things that kind of spark the chemical reaction, then it just snowballs from there. So the key to a lot of these principles is just kind of prevent these chemical reactions from happening, and a lot of that's sparked by the environment and environmental conditions.
Yeah, so like best case scenario, and a lot of museums for really precious organic objects like a fiber basket or like a sort of animal skin, they are starting. So I know in Tasmania, there's a conservator who is working with a lot of the museums that have Tasmanian tiger pelts, and they're coming up with a oxygen-free case with, responsive LED lighting with monitors in there, because these items are so precious that
one of a kind.
Yeah, that you really want to take every measure, and unfortunately oxygen and light and UV are, which are surrounding us, are the most damaging things to these things. So there are really high-tech ways to cut out those factors, but unfortunately they're kind of hard to achieve in a home setting.
Yeah, I've got a 25-year-old tapestry from Zimbabwe,
Wow.
which I'm about to vacuum and then put in the freezer.
Yeah, great.
I hope that I can get rid of whatever's eating some of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, and again, it's that sort of vacuum it, put it in the freezer, maybe even, for a few months.
Yeah,
vacuum it again, and just monitor that cycle. And, sometimes when you bring it out of the freezer, you can kind of give it a shake. And I was surprised even once bringing back a fiber basket from Vanuatu, and I got to the customs desk, and the way that they checked if there was insects in it was they got a blank piece of paper, put it on the desk, and then shook the basket to see if any insect bodies or anything came out. And so that's a good way, if you have a nice clean surface, give it a shake and see what comes out. And that's a way that you can check if you've got any beasties in there. But
you might need a microscope to check the beastie to work out what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be a dark internet hole as well, looking at gross insects magnified.
Right, I think that is about everything, unless someone thinks I've missed something, in which case put it down the bottom of the chat. Yeah, I think that is it, Caroline.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is it working?
Yep.
Thanks, Christina. And wow, that was so amazing. And I'm just thinking, what's going through my mind is it's really just common sense as well, to kind of stop and think about what you're doing. Don't rush into anything, but also just thinking about, like you're talking about, what kind of bugs and how long they live, and making sure they can't continue to survive, that kind of thing. So yeah, that was really fantastic. Thank you. And as we've said a couple of times now, we'll share the slides and the materials with everyone. It might not be today, it might be a few days, but we'll also at some point have the whole series accessible through our website as well. If you've got any further questions, you can email us or get in touch with Robyn and Elle at Care of Studios. And we've got one more workshop which we need to do in person at the Richmond Library because of our community with City of Yarra, and so realise that may not be accessible for everyone. But what we'd like to do is plan some more of these online workshops. So if you've got particular topics that you think we should address in future, please let us know. Just email through to the law address, which is womensartregistered.org, because we will be thinking about what other topics are going to be of interest for our members and our community. And we may be able to do that towards the end of this year or into next year when we can get some more funding. So just keep an eye out for that as well. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you everyone for attending. It's been really fantastic. And thanks to Robyn and Elle for your fantastic expertise and lovely workshop. Thanks very much.
Thank you.